The rain hammered my windshield like angry fists as I sat in the parking lot of the downtown Marriott, waiting for my next fare. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of night when decent people were already home watching late-night television or getting ready for bed. But here I was, Marcus Thompson, 43 years old, gripping a steering wheel that had seen better days, and wondering how my life had gotten to this point. The Uber app chimed, and I glanced at my phone mounted on the dashboard. A pickup request from the hotel's main entrance. 4-star rating, not terrible, but not great either. The destination showed as an upscale neighborhood about 20 minutes away, Riverside Heights. Good. That meant a decent fare to help me reach my nightly goal of $250. I pulled up to the hotel's covered entrance, where a woman in her mid-30s stood under the bright lights. Even through the rain-streaked passenger window, I could see she was dressed to kill. Black cocktail dress, designer heels, and a clutch that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the weather, and she had that look of someone who expected the world to accommodate her every whim. She yanked open the back door without checking if it was the right car, sliding across the leather seat with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to being chauffeured. The sudden absence of rain noise was replaced by the overwhelming scent of expensive perfume that made my nose twitch. "Riverside Heights," she said, without looking up from her phone, her voice carrying that particular brand of authority that comes from never having been told no. "And I'm in a hurry." "Good evening," I said, adjusting my rearview mirror to get a better look at her. "I'm Marcus, your driver. Could you confirm the exact address for me?" She finally glanced up, her green eyes scanning me like she was evaluating a piece of furniture. "It's in the app. Just drive." I swallowed the response that wanted to come out and pulled away from the hotel. The wipers struggled against the relentless downpour as we merged into the sparse, late-night traffic. The city looked different in weather like this. The neon signs blurred into watercolor streaks, and the empty streets took on an almost cinematic quality that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been fighting to see 3 feet ahead. "So, what brings you out on a night like this?" I asked, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. In my 3 years of driving for Uber, I'd learned that most passengers fell into 2 categories: those who wanted to talk your ear off and those who treated you like an invisible chauffeur. This one was clearly the latter, but I'd found that sometimes a little conversation could soften even the coldest riders. "Business dinner," she replied curtly, her fingers flying across her phone screen. The blue light illuminated her face, revealing sharp cheekbones and lips that seemed permanently set in a slight frown. Ran long. I nodded and focused on the road ahead. The GPS indicated we'd need to take the highway for most of the journey, which would give us about 15 minutes of relative quiet once we got past the downtown construction zone. The rain was starting to ease up slightly, though the roads were still slick enough to keep me cautious. As we approached the on-ramp, my passenger's phone rang. She answered it immediately, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my ears perk up despite myself. "It's done," she said, glancing toward the front seat as if checking to see if I was listening. I kept my eyes straight ahead, but my grip tightened on the steering wheel. "No, there won't be any complications. I made sure of that." My stomach did a small flip. In 3 years of driving strangers around the city, you heard all kinds of things: business deals, relationship drama, family arguments. But something about her tone sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "The transfer will show up in your account by morning," she continued, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engine. "Just remember our agreement. If anyone asks, you never saw me tonight." I found myself holding my breath, straining to catch every word. The highway stretched ahead of us, empty except for the occasional semi-truck throwing up sheets of spray as we passed.
The darkness beyond the headlights felt suddenly oppressive, like we were driving through a tunnel with no end in sight. She ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This time, her voice took on a completely different tone, warm, almost sultry. "Hey, baby," she purred. "I'm on my way home. Traffic's not too bad." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "Of course I missed you. The dinner was boring as hell. Just a bunch of old men talking about quarterly reports." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I found myself wondering how many other lies she told in a given day. My ex-wife used to lie like that, effortlessly, convincingly, with just enough detail to make it believable but not enough to be verified. It was a skill I'd never mastered and, frankly, never wanted to. "I should be home in 15 minutes," she continued. "Why don't you open that bottle of wine we've been saving? I think tonight calls for a celebration." Another pause, and then she laughed, a sound that was supposed to be genuine but felt hollow to my ears. "No, silly, I just closed a big deal today. I'll tell you all about it when I get there." As she ended the second call, I caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw something that looked almost like panic flash across her features. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "How much longer?" she asked, her voice back to its original sharp tone. "About 10 minutes," I replied, checking the GPS. "We'll be taking the Riverside exit." She nodded and returned to her phone, but I could sense a change in her demeanor. Her leg bounced nervously, and she kept glancing out the window as if expecting to see something, or someone, following us. The highway curved through a section of undeveloped land, with thick woods on either side that seemed to swallow our headlights. It was the kind of stretch that always made me slightly uneasy, especially on nights like this when the weather reduced visibility to almost nothing. Out here, if something went wrong, you could scream for help and nobody would hear you. That's when my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down at the notification on my dashboard mount, and my blood ran cold. The message was from an unknown number, and it contained just 7 words that made my hands start to shake. "Don't trust the woman in back." I tried to keep my breathing steady as I processed what I'd just read. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where my passenger was still absorbed in her phone, apparently unaware of my sudden tension. The message could have been a wrong number, a prank, or someone's idea of a sick joke. But given what I'd overheard from her phone calls, it felt like a warning I couldn't afford to ignore. Another text came through, this one longer. "The police are looking for her. Whatever you do, don't let her know you know." My mouth went dry. In the 3 years I'd been driving for Uber, I'd picked up my share of questionable characters, people who were obviously drunk, clearly on drugs, or just generally sketchy. But this was different. This felt dangerous in a way that made every nerve in my body scream at me to pull over and let her out, consequences be damned. But I couldn't, not yet. If she really was running from the police, abandoning her on a dark highway in the middle of nowhere could make me an accessory to whatever she'd done. And if the texts were wrong, if this was all some misunderstanding, I'd be ruining my rating and possibly my job over nothing. So I did what I'd learned to do during my 20-year marriage to a woman who specialized in manipulation. I played dumb and stayed alert. "Looks like the rain's finally letting up," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly normal given that my heart was hammering against my ribs. She glanced up from her phone, and for a moment our eyes met in the mirror. "Good," she said. "I hate driving in weather like this." "You don't drive yourself usually?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light while my mind raced through possibilities. "I have a car," she said, a slight edge creeping into her voice. "It's in the shop." Another lie, I was almost certain. Everything about her screamed money. The clothes, the jewelry, the way she carried herself. Someone with that kind of wealth would have multiple vehicles, or at least access to a rental car. The fact that she was using Uber on a night like this suggested she didn't want to leave a paper trail with her own vehicle. My phone buzzed again. This time I couldn't help but glance at it, despite every instinct telling me to keep my eyes on the road. License plate CAR 7854, reported stolen this morning. Check your passenger. The blood drained from my face. CAR 7854, the exact license plate number of the silver BMW we'd passed in the hotel parking lot, the one parked just 3 spaces away from where I'd picked her up. The timing couldn't have been a coincidence. I realized my passenger had stopped talking and was studying my face in the mirror with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice deceptively casual. "Fine," I managed to say, forcing a smile. "Just checking traffic ahead." But I could tell she didn't buy it. Her posture had changed, becoming more rigid, more alert, like a predator sensing that her prey was becoming aware of the trap. The exit for Riverside Heights appeared ahead of us, the familiar green sign glowing in my headlights like a beacon. Almost there. Whatever was going to happen, it would be over soon. As I took the off-ramp, my passenger leaned forward slightly, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with something else, something that reminded me of the metallic scent of fear. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I think there's been a change of plans." The GPS indicated we had 3 more miles to go to reach her destination in Riverside Heights. 3 miles felt like an eternity as I processed her words and tried to figure out what she meant by a change of plans. My hands were slick with sweat against the steering wheel, and I had to concentrate to keep the car steady as we navigated the winding residential streets. "Change of plans?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. She was quiet for a moment, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw her studying something on her phone screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. The blue light cast eerie shadows across her face, making her look almost ghoulish in the darkness of the back seat. "Actually, never mind," she said finally. "Keep going to the original address." But her tone had changed. Where before she'd been dismissive and imperious, now there was something else, a calculating quality that made me feel like I was being sized up for something I wouldn't like. My phone buzzed with another message, and this time I made no attempt to hide the fact that I was reading it. "Police have been notified." Help is coming! The relief that washed over me was immediately replaced by a new wave of anxiety. Help was coming, but how long would it take? And what exactly was I supposed to keep her talking about? I'd never been good at small talk, and now my life might depend on it. "So, what kind of business are you in?" I asked, hating how fake my voice sounded. She laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Let's just say I'm in acquisitions." "Acquisitions?" I repeated. "Like buying companies?" "Something like that." Her eyes never left my face in the mirror. "What about you? You seem like the kind of guy who's got stories to tell." The way she said it made my skin crawl. It was the tone of voice someone uses when they're fishing for information, trying to determine how much you know and how much of a threat you might be. "Not really," I said. "I'm pretty boring. Used to work in accounting before the divorce. Now I drive for Uber to make ends meet." It was the truth, mostly. What I didn't mention was that my years in accounting had taught me to notice details, to spot inconsistencies in numbers and stories. Skills that were serving me well right now as I cataloged every contradiction in her behavior. "Divorced, huh?" she said, and I could hear the wheels turning in her head. "Kids?" 2, I said, thinking of Emma and Jake, both away at college and blissfully unaware that their old man was currently trapped in a car with what was apparently a fugitive.
They're both grown now. That's nice, she said, but she wasn't really listening. Her attention had shifted to something outside the passenger window, and I saw her shoulders tense. We were passing through a section of Riverside Heights where the streetlights were more widely spaced, leaving long stretches of shadow between pools of yellow light. The houses here were set back from the road behind tall hedges and iron gates, the kind of neighborhood where people valued their privacy and didn't ask too many questions about their neighbors. "Turn left at the next street," she said suddenly. I glanced at the GPS, but the destination is still... I said, "Turn left." Her voice had gone hard again, all pretense of friendliness evaporating. I made the turn, my mind racing. The street she directed me onto was narrower than the main road, lined with mature oak trees that formed a canopy overhead. There were no streetlights here, just the occasional porch light from houses that seemed to be set even further back from the road. "Where exactly am I taking you?" I asked, trying to keep the growing panic out of my voice. "Just keep driving. I'll tell you when to stop." My phone was buzzing constantly now, but I couldn't risk looking at it. In the mirror, I could see her leaning forward, watching the road ahead with an intensity that suggested she was looking for something specific. "There," she said, pointing to a gap in the trees on the right. "Pull in there." It wasn't a driveway exactly, more like a dirt road that disappeared into the woods. Everything in my gut screamed at me not to turn, but I also couldn't see any alternative. If I refused, what would she do? And if I tried to turn around and head back to the main road, would she try to grab the wheel? I slowed the car, my turn signal clicking in the silence as I prepared to make what felt like the worst decision of my life. That's when I saw the police cars. They were parked about 100 yards down the main road, partially hidden behind a cluster of mailboxes, but their presence was unmistakable once you knew to look for them. No lights, no sirens, just waiting. My passenger saw them too. I felt rather than heard her sharp intake of breath, and when I glanced in the mirror, her face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "Drive past," she hissed. "Don't even slow down." But it was too late for that. I'd already started the turn into the dirt road, and backing out now would only draw more attention. Besides, if the police were here, it meant the anonymous texter had been telling the truth, and help really was coming. The dirt road was rougher than I'd expected, full of potholes that made the car bounce and sway as we crept forward between the trees. My headlights illuminated a narrow corridor of pine and oak, but beyond that, everything was black. "This is far enough," she said when we'd gone maybe 50 yards. "Stop here." I put the car in park, but kept the engine running. In the sudden silence, I could hear the sound of her breathing, quick and shallow, like someone trying not to panic. "You know," she said conversationally, "I really hope you haven't done anything stupid." Before I could respond, she was opening the door and sliding out of the back seat. But instead of walking away into the woods like I'd expected, she came around to the driver's side window. I rolled it down part way, just enough to hear her speak. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice low and steady. "You're going to mark this ride as complete in the app, and you're going to rate it 5 stars. Then you're going to drive away and forget you ever saw me." "And if I don't?" The question came out before I could stop it. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then we might have a problem." My phone chose that moment to ring, not buzz with a text, but actually ring with an incoming call. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet of the woods, and both of us jumped. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but given everything that had happened, I had a feeling I knew who it might be. "Answer it," she said, and there was something in her voice that made it clear this wasn't a request. I hit the accept button and put the phone on speaker. "Marcus Thompson." The voice was crisp, professional, definitely law enforcement. "Yes," I managed.
This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Metro Police.
Are you currently in your vehicle with a female passenger? I looked up at the woman standing beside my car. Her expression had gone from confident to trapped in the space of a single sentence. Yes, I said again. Is she armed? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. I'd never thought to consider whether she might have a weapon, but now that the detective had asked, I realized how vulnerable I'd been for the entire ride. I don't know, I admitted. Mr. Thompson, I need you to very carefully exit your vehicle and walk toward the main road. Can you do that for me? Before I could answer, my passenger stepped back from the car, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender that seemed more theatrical than genuine. "That's not going to be necessary," she called out toward my phone. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Ma'am, please step away from the vehicle and keep your hands visible." Detective Chen's voice came through the speaker. But instead of complying, she laughed, the same hollow sound I'd heard during her phone call earlier. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in," she said, looking directly at me through the open window. "None of you do." And then, before I could react, she turned and ran into the woods. I sat there for a moment, paralyzed by the sudden silence and the realization that I was alone in the middle of nowhere, with a phone full of police officers who were probably racing toward my location. "Miss
Thompson?" Detective Chen's voice brought me back to reality. "Are you still there?" "She ran," I said, finding my voice, "into the woods." "Are you injured?" I took a quick inventory. Scared, confused, adrenaline-soaked, but physically intact. "No, I'm okay." "Good. Officers are en route to your location. Please stay in your vehicle until they arrive." As if I had anywhere else to go. I sat in the darkness, engines still running, listening to the sounds of the forest around me and wondering what I'd stumbled into. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching, getting louder with each passing second. My phone buzzed with a new text from the unknown number that had been warning me all night. "Thank you for listening. She won't get far." I stared at the message, trying to process everything that had happened. Someone had been watching, had known who my passenger was and what she was running from. But who and how? The sirens were getting closer now, and I could see the first faint glow of red and blue lights reflecting off the trees. Whatever this was all about, it was almost over. Or so I thought. The police arrived like a small army, 3 squad cars, 2 unmarked vehicles, and what looked like a canine unit, all converging on the dirt road with their lights painting the forest in strobing colors.
I stayed in my car as instructed, watching in my mirrors as officers poured out of their vehicles and began organizing what was obviously a well-coordinated search operation. Detective Chen turned out to be a woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She approached my car with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Chen. Are you feeling okay to answer a few questions?" I nodded, rolling down the window completely. The cool night air felt good after being trapped in the car with my passenger's overwhelming perfume. "Can you tell me exactly what happened tonight?" I walked her through the entire ride, starting with the pickup at the hotel and ending with my passenger's disappearance into the woods. Detective Chen took notes but didn't interrupt, letting me tell the story in my own words. "You said she made several phone calls during the ride," Chen said when I finished. "Can you remember any specific details about what she said?" I repeated what I could recall, the mention of a transfer, the instruction to deny seeing her, the conversation with someone she called baby about celebrating a big deal. Chen nodded grimly. "That fits with what we know. Mr. Thompson, you may not realize it, but you picked up one of our most wanted fugitives tonight." "What did she do?" "Her name is Rebecca Martinez, though she's been using several aliases recently."
She's wanted in connection with a series of embezzlement schemes targeting elderly investors. We estimate she's stolen over $2 million in the past 6 months. $2 million! I tried to wrap my head around the number. No wonder she'd been so nervous, so calculating. The phone calls you overheard, Chen continued, we believe she was coordinating the transfer of stolen funds to offshore accounts. Tonight was probably her last night in the country. How did you know she was in my car? I asked. Chen smiled for the first time since arriving. We've been tracking her movements through various means. When she used her credit card to pay for the hotel room, we knew we were close. But we might not have found her at all if it hadn't been for an anonymous tip. Anonymous tip? Someone called our hotline about an hour ago and said they'd seen her getting into an Uber. They gave us your license plate number and direction of travel. I thought about the mysterious text messages that had warned me about her. Do you know who called it in? Not yet, but we're grateful they did. Chen glanced toward the woods where officers with flashlights were beginning their search. Rebecca Martinez is considered dangerous. She's been known to carry weapons, and she's desperate. You're lucky nothing worse happened. The words sent a chill down my spine as I realized how close I'd come to something terrible.
All those moments when she'd been studying me in the rearview mirror, calculating, deciding, what exactly had she been planning? "Will you catch her?" I asked. The dogs picked up her scent. These woods only go about a quarter mile before they hit a residential area, so unless she has another vehicle waiting, well, we'll have her soon. As if on cue, we heard barking from somewhere deep in the forest, followed by shouts from the officers. Chen's radio crackled to life with a stream of codes I didn't understand, but her expression suggested good news. "Looks like they've got her," she said. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement, but for now, you're free to go." I started the engine, eager to get out of the woods and back to civilization. But as I was about to put the car in reverse, Chen knocked on my window again. "One more thing," she said. "The anonymous tipster who called us tonight, they specifically asked that we make sure you were safe. Sounds like you've got a guardian angel looking out for you." As I drove back toward the main road, passing the convoy of police vehicles still arriving at the scene, I couldn't stop thinking about Chen's words. Who had been watching me tonight, and why had they cared enough to make sure I was protected? My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Glad you're safe. Go home to your family."
I pulled over at the first well-lit gas station I found and called Emma, my daughter. It was late, but I needed to hear her voice, needed to remember what was real and important in my life. "Dad, is everything okay?" she answered on the second ring, alert despite the hour. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice." "You sound weird. Are you sure you're okay?" "I had a strange night at work, but it's over now, and I'm heading home." "Do you want to talk about it?" I looked out at the bright lights of the gas station, at the normal world of people buying snacks and filling their tanks, and realized that I wanted nothing more than to put this entire experience behind me. "Maybe another time," I said. "I love you, Em." "Love you too, Dad. Drive safe." As I hung up and pulled back onto the road, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I'd give my statement to the police, and then I was taking a few days off from driving. Maybe it was time to start looking for something more stable, something that didn't involve picking up strangers in the middle of the night. But as I drove through the empty streets toward my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Rebecca Martinez was caught, but the person who'd been sending me those warning texts was still out there, still watching. And something told me our paths would cross again. 2 nights later, I was back behind the wheel despite my earlier resolution to take time off.
Rent was due, and the electricity bill wasn't going to pay itself. I'd spent the previous day at the police station giving my statement, learning more about Rebecca Martinez and her crimes than I ever wanted to know.
Apparently, she'd been targeting senior citizens with fake investment opportunities, convincing them to liquidate their retirement accounts and transfer the money to what they believed were high-yield savings programs. The oldest victim was 87 years old and had lost his entire life savings, over $300,000 that was supposed to pay for his wife's medical care. The details made me sick to my stomach, but they also helped me understand why someone had been willing to help catch her. Maybe her anonymous tipster was one of her victims, or a family member of someone she'd hurt. It was just past midnight when my phone chimed with a ride request. The pickup location made my blood run cold. Metro Correctional Facility. The destination was listed simply as anywhere but here. I stared at the request for a long moment, my finger hovering over the accept button. Every instinct told me to decline and wait for a different fare. But something else, curiosity maybe, or a sense that I owed it to someone to see this through, made me hit accept. The drive to the jail took 20 minutes through mostly empty streets. The facility was a concrete fortress surrounded by razor wire and harsh fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of old bones. I'd driven past it countless times, but never actually stopped to consider what it must be like inside those walls. A guard directed me to a waiting area where people being released were processed out. I sat in my car, engine running, watching a steady stream of individuals emerge from a side door. Some picked up by family members, others walking away on foot into the night. At 12:47 a.m., I saw her. Rebecca Martinez looked nothing like the confident woman who'd gotten into my car 2 nights earlier. Her designer dress had been replaced by ill-fitting civilian clothes that looked like they'd come from a donation box. Her perfectly styled hair was now pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was pale and drawn without makeup. But it was definitely her. She walked slowly toward my car, her shoulders hunched against the cool night air. When she reached the passenger door, she stood there for a moment as if gathering courage before getting in. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly, settling into the front seat this time instead of the back. I turned to look at her, my heart pounding. "What the hell are you doing in my car?" "I requested you specifically." She pulled out a phone, not the expensive model she'd had 2 nights ago, but a basic device that looked like it had come from a convenience store. "The app let me enter your vehicle number." "How do you even have my—" I started, then stopped. Of course she'd have my information.
She'd ridden with me, and despite everything that had happened, the Uber system would still have records of our trip. "I made bail," she said, answering the question I hadn't asked. "Well, someone made bail for me." "Someone? That's what I'm trying to figure out." She looked out the windshield toward the prison entrance. "I was expecting to sit in there for weeks, maybe months. Then this afternoon, a lawyer I'd never heard of shows up and posts a $100,000 bond." I stared at her. "You think I had something to do with that?" "No," she said quickly, "but I think whoever was sending you those text messages the other night might have." My blood went cold. "How do you know about the texts?" "Because I've been getting them too." She held up her phone, showing me a screen full of messages from the same unknown number that had been warning me about her. "Look at this." I leaned over to read the messages. "Your rideshare driver is not your enemy. The real criminals are the ones you trusted with your money. Marcus Thompson is going to help you understand what really happened." "What the fuck is this?" I whispered. "I don't know, but Marcus, I think we're both being played." I put the car in park and turned to face her fully. "Played by who? And why should I believe anything you say? You stole $2 million from senior citizens." Her face crumpled, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely vulnerable. "I know how it looks." "I know what the police told you, but it's not the whole story." "Then tell me the whole story." She took a shaky breath. 6 months ago, I was working as a financial advisor for Morrison & Associates, legitimate company, good reputation. I had clients who trusted me, people I'd been helping for years. Then David Morrison, the owner, came to me with what he said was an opportunity. I waited for her to continue. He said he had connections with an investment fund that was offering guaranteed returns of 12% annually. Said it was exclusive, only available to his most trusted advisors and their best clients. The paperwork looked legitimate, the references checked out. I thought I was helping my clients get rich. But it was a Ponzi scheme. Worse, it wasn't even that sophisticated. Morrison was just taking the money and moving it through a series of shell companies he controlled. When clients asked about their returns, he'd show them fake statements and tell them the profits were being reinvested. So why are you the one in jail? Where's Morrison? Rebecca's laugh was bitter. Dead. Car accident 3 weeks ago. Very convenient timing. I felt a chill run down my spine. You think someone killed him? I think David Morrison was a middleman, just like me. And when things started falling apart, someone decided he was a liability. She looked directly at me, just like they decided I was. But you ran. If you were innocent, why didn't you go to the police? Because by the time I figured out what was really happening, all the evidence pointed to me. The shell company accounts were set up using my Social Security number. The fake investment documents had my electronic signature. Even my own bank accounts showed deposits that I swear I never made. I studied her face, trying to determine if she was telling the truth or just feeding me another lie. The problem was, after 20 years of marriage to a master manipulator, I'd learned that the best lies were always mixed with truth. So who do you think is really behind this? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But Marcus, whoever it is, they know about both of us. They've been watching us, manipulating us, and I don't think they're done. As if summoned by her words, both of our phones buzzed simultaneously with incoming messages. Mine read, "Take her to 1247 Elm Street, apartment 3B. It's time she learned the truth." Hers said, "Trust Marcus. He's the only one who can help you now." We looked at each other across the center console of my car, two strangers bound together by circumstances neither of us fully understood. 1247 Elm Street, Rebecca said quietly. "Do you know where that is?" I did. It was in Riverside Heights, less than a mile from where I'd been taking her 2 nights ago, when everything had gone sideways.
Rebecca, I said, and using her name felt strange after thinking of her as my passenger for so long. If I drive you there, and this turns out to be some kind of trap, some way for you to escape or hurt someone else, then you can leave me there and call the police yourself, she finished. Marcus, I'm out on bail for crimes I didn't commit, being directed by someone I can't identify to meet with a driver who has every reason to hate me. If anyone's walking into a trap here, it's me. She had a point. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the jail. As we headed toward Riverside Heights for the second time in 3 days, I found myself wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But I had to know who had been pulling our strings, and why. The address led us to a modest apartment complex in an older part of Riverside Heights, far from the upscale neighborhood where Rebecca had originally claimed to live. The building was well maintained, but unremarkable, the kind of place where young professionals started out or retirees downsized to. Apartment 3B was on the 3rd floor, accessible via an external staircase that creaked under our weight as we climbed. Rebecca stayed close behind me, and I could feel her nervousness radiating like heat. The door was answered before we knocked. "Come in," said a voice from inside, "both of you." The apartment was small but neat, furnished with the kind of generic pieces you'd find at a discount furniture store. What caught my attention immediately were the walls, covered with photographs, documents, and what looked like a detective's investigation board, with strings connecting various pieces of evidence. The man who'd invited us in appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of deep-set wrinkles that spoke of a lifetime of worry. He moved slowly but deliberately, gesturing for us to sit on a worn couch while he took the chair across from us. "My name is Harold Chen," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "Detective Sarah Chen is my daughter." Rebecca and I exchanged glances. The detective who'd coordinated my rescue 2 nights ago? "Mr. Chen," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Please, let me explain before you ask questions. I know this is confusing, and I know you both have reasons not to trust anyone right now." He gestured toward the wall of documents. "What you're looking at is 6 months of my life. 6 months of investigating the people who stole my retirement savings." My stomach dropped. "You're one of Rebecca's victims." "No," he said firmly. "I'm one of David Morrison's victims. Rebecca here was just another pawn in a much larger game." Harold stood up slowly and walked to the wall, pointing to a photograph of a distinguished-looking man in his 50s. David Morrison, upstanding member of the community, married to a city councilwoman, donated regularly to charity. Also a sociopathic thief who specialized in targeting senior citizens. "But the police said," Rebecca began. "The police said what they were told to say," Harold interrupted, "what they were given evidence to believe. But evidence can be manufactured, Miss Martinez. Stories can be planted. And when you have the right connections, you can make sure the investigation goes exactly where you want it to go." He moved to another section of the wall, this one covered with bank statements and financial documents. "Morrison approached me 18 months ago, said he had an exclusive investment opportunity, something only available to his most valued clients. The returns were guaranteed, he said, 12% annually with the principal protected." "The same thing he told me," Rebecca whispered. "Exactly, because it was the same scam, run the same way, with the same false promises. The difference is I'm a retired accountant who spent 40 years learning how to spot financial irregularities. When my first quarterly statement showed returns that didn't match the market conditions, I started digging." Harold pulled out a thick folder and set it on the coffee table between us. "What I found was a network of shell companies, fake investment funds, and forged documents that went far beyond what one man could orchestrate alone." I leaned forward to look at the documents. Even with my accounting background, the complexity was staggering. Dozens of corporate entities, bank accounts in multiple states, and a web of financial transactions that would take a forensic accountant months to untangle. "Morrison wasn't the mastermind," Harold continued. "He was middle management. Someone else was calling the shots, and when Morrison started getting sloppy, when people like me started asking questions, they decided to tie up loose ends." "By killing him," Rebecca said. "By making it look like an accident, yes, and by setting up a fall guy, or in this case a fall woman, to take the blame for everything." I studied the wall of evidence again, noticing details I'd missed before. Photographs of other people I didn't recognize, copies of legal documents, even what looked like surveillance photos taken from a distance. "How long have you been watching us?" I asked. Harold smiled grimly. "I've been watching Rebecca for 3 months, ever since I figured out she was being set up. I've been watching you for 3 days, ever since I realized someone was going to use you to get to her." "Use me? How?" "Think about it, Marcus. Of all the Uber drivers in the city, what are the odds that Rebecca would randomly get paired with someone who had the skills to notice the inconsistencies in her story? Someone with an accounting background who would pay attention to details most drivers would miss? The implications hit me like a physical blow." "You're saying her getting in my car wasn't a coincidence?" "I'm saying someone has been orchestrating this entire scenario from the beginning. Rebecca's arrest, her bail hearing, even her request for you specifically when she got out of jail, none of it was random." Rebecca had gone pale. "But who? Who has that kind of power, that kind of reach?" Harold walked to the final section of his evidence wall, where a single photograph was pinned at the center like the spider in a web. The woman in the picture was in her 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of authoritative bearing that suggested someone accustomed to being in charge. "Meet District Attorney Patricia Vance," Harold said. "The woman who's been running for governor on a platform of fighting financial crimes against seniors. The woman who's been getting great press for prosecuting cases exactly like yours, Rebecca. And the woman who's been very carefully ensuring that investigations never dig deep enough to find the real criminals." I stared at the photograph. The DA is behind this? Not just behind it, she's been the puppet master from the beginning. Morrison, Rebecca, even you, Marcus, you've all been playing parts in a script she wrote. "But why?" Rebecca asked. "Why go through all this trouble?" "Because Patricia Vance isn't just running for governor," Harold said. "She's been positioning herself as the champion of elderly victims, the prosecutor who's tough on financial crimes. Every case she's solved, every conviction she's secured, has been carefully orchestrated to build her reputation." He pulled out another folder, this one filled with newspaper clippings and campaign materials. "Look at this. Vance secures conviction in senior fraud case. DA Vance recovers millions for elderly victims. Vance, tough on crime, tough on criminals." Every headline, every story, building toward her gubernatorial campaign. "So she's been creating the crimes she solves?" I asked. "More than that, she's been creating an entire criminal enterprise, then prosecuting carefully selected fall guys, while the real perpetrators, her people, disappear with the money." Rebecca stood up suddenly, pacing to the window. "This is insane. You're talking about a conspiracy involving the district attorney's office, multiple murders, millions of dollars. Why should we believe any of this?" Harold walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. "Because 3 hours ago, my daughter called me. Someone in the DA's office contacted the police department asking for detailed information about your case, Rebecca. Specifically, they wanted to know if any other suspects had been identified." "What did she tell them?" "That the investigation was ongoing. But Marcus, they also asked about you. They wanted to know if you'd provided any additional information beyond your initial statement." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Somehow, Patricia Vance knew that Harold had been investigating, knew that Rebecca and I were connected, and was trying to figure out how much we'd discovered. "So what happens now?" I asked. Harold stood up and walked to a desk in the corner of the room, returning with 2 manila envelopes. "Now you have a choice. In these envelopes is everything I've compiled over the past 6 months. Bank records, witness statements, documented proof of the conspiracy. Enough evidence to bring down not just Patricia Vance, but the entire network she's been running." He handed one envelope to Rebecca and one to me. "You can take this to the FBI, to the state police, to a federal prosecutor, anyone outside of Vance's sphere of influence. Or you can walk away, pretend this conversation never happened, and hope that she doesn't decide you know too much." Rebecca tore open her envelope immediately, scanning the documents inside. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally something that looked like relief. "This is proof," she whispered. "This is proof that I was set up." I held my envelope without opening it, feeling its weight. "Harold, if we do this, if we try to expose her, what's to stop her from having us killed like Morrison?" "Because this time she won't see it coming," he said. "She thinks she has you both under control, thinks she's still pulling the strings. But she doesn't know about me, doesn't know what I've discovered. And she certainly doesn't know that my daughter has been quietly building a parallel investigation within the police department. Detective Chin is working with you?" Sarah doesn't know about tonight, doesn't know I've been investigating on my own, but she's been asking questions about some of the same cases, noticing the same patterns. If we move quickly, we can coordinate with her to make sure the evidence gets to the right people." I looked at Rebecca, then back at Harold. "And if we don't move quickly? Then Patricia Vance becomes governor in 6 months, and people like her will keep stealing from people like me until there's nothing left to steal." The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. 3 days ago, I'd been a simple Uber driver trying to make rent. Now I was holding evidence that could bring down a criminal conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of local government. But I thought about the 87-year-old man who'd lost his wife's medical money, about all the other victims whose names I didn't know, but whose lives had been destroyed by people like Patricia Vance. "What do you need us to do?" Harold smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. "I need you to be exactly what you've been all along, witnesses who can testify to what you've seen and experienced. But this time you'll be telling the truth to people who can actually do something about it." As we prepared to leave the apartment, Harold handed me one final piece of paper. "This is the contact information for FBI Special Agent Maria Santos. She specializes in public corruption cases, and she's been waiting for someone to bring her exactly the kind of evidence you're now carrying." Rebecca tucked her envelope into her jacket. "Harold, why did you help me, after what you thought I'd done to you?" "Because I spent 40 years as an accountant, Miss Martinez. I know the difference between someone who's guilty and someone who's been framed. And because if we don't stop people like Patricia Vance, they'll keep destroying lives until there's no one left to stand up to them." As we walked back down the creaking stairs to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just for Rebecca, not just for Harold and the other victims, but for the possibility that sometimes ordinary people could actually make a difference. "Marcus," Rebecca said as we reached the parking lot, "I know this is a lot to ask, but would you mind driving me to the FBI office? I think it's time to tell the real story." I looked at her. This woman who 3 days ago I'd thought was a criminal, who I now realized was as much a victim as anyone else, and nodded. "Let's go finish this." As we drove through the empty streets toward the federal building downtown, both of our phones buzzed one final time with messages from the unknown number. But this time, we knew who was sending them. Harold's message was simple: "Thank you for listening. Now make them pay." The FBI field office was located in a glass tower downtown, imposing even at 3 in the morning. Special Agent Santos had agreed to meet us despite the hour, and she was waiting in the lobby when we arrived, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen every form of corruption imaginable. "Mr. Thompson, Miss Martinez," she said, shaking our hands. "Mr. Chen called me an hour ago. He said you have something I need to see." We followed her up to a conference room on the 15th floor, where she spread Harold's evidence across a large table like pieces of a massive puzzle. "This is impressive work," she said, after reviewing the documents. "Thorough, well-documented, and exactly the kind of evidence we need to build a federal case." "So you believe us?" Rebecca asked. "Miss Martinez, we've been investigating irregularities in the DA's office for 8 months. What you've brought me tonight connects dots we couldn't connect on our own." Agent Santos pulled out her own file, adding federal documents to Harold's collection. "Patricia Vance has been on our radar since last year, when we noticed unusual patterns in her prosecution statistics. Too many cases with perfect evidence, too many convenient confessions, too many defendants who seemed more like scapegoats than actual criminals." "But you couldn't prove it?" I said. "We couldn't prove it because we were missing the financial component. Vance was smart. She kept her criminal enterprise separate from her political activities. Until now." Over the next 2 hours, we walked Agent Santos through everything, from my first encounter with Rebecca to Harold's 6-month investigation to the text messages that had guided us together. She took detailed notes, asked pointed questions, and gradually built a timeline that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. The beauty of Vance's operation, Santos explained, is that she was essentially farming her own cases. Create the crime, control the investigation, prosecute a convenient fall guy, and take credit for protecting the victims. Meanwhile, her real accomplices disappear with the money. "How many people were involved?" Rebecca asked. "Based on what you've shown me, at least a dozen. Lawyers, financial advisors, even some police officers who made sure investigations went in the right direction." I thought about Detective Chen, Harold's daughter. Are there good cops who've been investigating too? Absolutely. Detective Chen isn't the only one who's been asking questions. We've identified several honest officers who've been stonewalled or reassigned when they got too close to the truth. Agent Santos gathered up the documents and locked them in a secure briefcase. Here's what happens next.
We're going to coordinate with the state police and the honest officers in the local department to execute simultaneous raids on Vance's office, her home, and the offices of her known associates. When? Rebecca asked. Tomorrow morning. We can't risk giving them time to destroy evidence or disappear. As we prepared to leave, Santos pulled me aside. Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that what you did tonight, listening to your instincts, protecting Miss Martinez, helping to expose this conspiracy, that took real courage. I was just driving my car, I said. You were just driving your car when you could have chosen to look the other way, to mind your own business, to let someone else deal with the problems of the world. But you didn't. You chose to get involved, and because of that choice, we're going to be able to stop a criminal enterprise that's stolen millions of dollars and ruined dozens of lives. Outside the federal building, Rebecca and I stood on the sidewalk in the pre-dawn darkness, both of us processing what we'd just been through. I should probably call my bail bondsman, she said. Let him know I'm not planning to skip town. Rebecca, I said, I owe you an apology. When this started, I thought you were exactly what the police said you were. You had every reason to think that. The evidence against me was pretty convincing. But I should have listened better, should have given you the benefit of the doubt.
She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since this whole ordeal began. Marcus, you did listen. That's why we're here instead of in hiding or dead. As I drove her back to the halfway house where she was required to stay while on bail, I found myself thinking about the randomness of life, about how a simple Uber ride could change everything. 3 days ago, I'd been a divorced accountant driving strangers around to pay the bills. Now I was a key witness in a federal correction case. "What are you going to do when this is all over?" Rebecca asked as we pulled up to her temporary home. "Probably go back to driving," I said, "at least until I can find something more stable. What about you?" "I don't know. My career in financial services is pretty much over, regardless of whether I'm cleared of the charges. Maybe I'll become a victim's advocate, help other people who get caught up in scams like this." She paused with her hand on the door handle. "Marcus, thank you. For everything. For listening to those text messages, for not abandoning me when you could have, for seeing this through to the end. Thank you for trusting me," I said, "and for being brave enough to tell the truth." As I drove home to my empty apartment, I reflected on the events of the past 3 days. Tomorrow, the news would be full of stories about Patricia Vance's arrest, about the conspiracy she'd been running, about the millions of dollars in stolen funds that would hopefully be returned to their rightful owners. But tonight, driving through the quiet streets of the city I'd come to know so well from behind the wheel of my Uber, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of knowing I'd done the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it was dangerous. My phone, silent now that Harold no longer needed to send anonymous warnings, sat in its dashboard mount like a reminder of how quickly life could change. Tomorrow, I'd probably get another ride request, pick up another stranger, drive them safely to their destination. But I'd never again assume that a simple car ride was really simple, or that the person in my back seat was exactly who they appeared to be. Sometimes, I realized, the most important journeys aren't about reaching a destination. They're about choosing to see the trip through to the end, no matter where it leads you. As I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, my phone buzzed one final time. But this wasn't from Harold's unknown number. This was from Rebecca. Thank you for being exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Some rides change everything. I smiled, turned off the engine, and headed inside to get some sleep. Tomorrow would bring new passengers, new conversations, new destinations. But tonight had reminded me that sometimes, when you're willing to listen and brave enough to act, you can help change someone's entire world. And sometimes, in the process, you end up changing your own.